to the Huntington Way Show. This is an educational show designed to help parents. I'm your host, Yvonne Strachan, author and founder of InspirationalHomeschooling.com, where we share inspiring stories, encouragement, and supportive resources to help you homeschool well. I am here with Deborah Randall, and she is discussing the testing and evaluation options with me because there are a lot of people that at this time of year are wondering about the testing and evaluation options and gauging where their children are in the educational progress. So welcome, Deborah.
Thank you, Yvonne. I appreciate the invitation to be here with you today.
Oh, thank you for coming and talking to me about the testing and evaluation. I'm sure it'll be so helpful to all the homeschool families. I understand you have taught children in the classroom for 8 years and that you have a current teaching license in Colorado and that you are in the trenches with all of us homeschool moms,
That's true.
homeschooling children. And I know that you were, as a former classroom teacher, you chose homeschooling as the educational choice for your children. And I'm wondering how that went for you and why you decided that.
Yes, thank you for that question. Yes, I have a background in being an elementary education teacher. I have a degree in elementary education, taught in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And I was pondering as my husband and I actually were dating that conversation began to come up even at that point. And so some of the things that I noticed back when I was in Tulsa was I got an opportunity to interact with other homeschool students. And I just noticed how well they were socially poised. They were super curious. They really enjoyed their learning. And so that was one of the things that began kind of an inquiry process for me about homeschooling and learning more about it at that point. And then, as I mentioned, my husband now and I, when we were dating, we're talking about should I stay home when our children are born? Like, what would that look like? And so we decided that it seemed like such a natural thing for us just to continue into homeschooling after our children were no longer toddlers and were at school age. And then the third option really was to pray, to find
Wow.
out from God what we were supposed to be doing for our own family and what that could look like for our future for us. And then lastly was in praying was learning from God, a specific a verse, and it's from Proverbs 22 verse 6. Train up a child in the way he should go, and in keeping with his individual gift or bent, and when he is old he will not depart from it. And then lastly, after I was here in Colorado, was talking to other homeschooling families and learning what the process even was, which we'll talk about more today.
Oh, wonderful. Oh, and there is a lot of people that really get curious about homeschooling when they see how kids interact with other people and how kind they are and how well versed they are really in both social circles and educationally as well. So that is um, really something that a lot of people consider when they really start homeschooling. They really look at us and the kids. So that's really an important point.
Yes.
And I love that you prayed about it before you started.
Mhm.
Yes, for sure. Would you share with us um, how, why, um, what the difference is for you when you started homeschooling from being a teacher and what that looked like?
And I think some of the things that I would say is I'm going to really try and focus on a number of the strengths that I see in homeschooling. So one of them definitely is you get to individualize for your own children. You get to see what their passions are, what their strengths are, and focus in on that. Another one is that you get to go at the pace that your children are ready for. So for some children, they're ready to start reading at 4. Others, like my older daughter, it's more like 7 before they're really ready to start reading. So you get to go at the pace that your children want to go at. Another thing is you get opportunities to work in your community alongside your children. So volunteering, whether it's at church or in your community yourself, you get those opportunities that you don't if they are in a regular school situation. And then lastly, or not lastly, but another option is you get to study and read materials when you as a family feel like it's appropriate to read them and study them together. And most importantly, probably for my daughters, would be is you get time together as a family that you don't have if your children are away at school all day long.
Oh, yeah. Those are some really great points. And I noticed that in my homeschool as well, where my oldest child has a missing chromosome. So we had moved very slowly with her. In fact, we graduated her at age 21. And she's ready to
Right.
go out in the world as far as writing and editing. And she is really thriving. And then also my second daughter, she is also thriving, but she really um, seemed to be more advanced. And then each of my
Yes.
children are different, and I love that we can accommodate them.
Yes.
It is also just being one on one
Mhm.
and being able to see what their needs are for sure. So I want to move on to testing because I know a lot of our listeners are really curious about a lot of the testing. And I want to remind our listeners that each state regulates testing. And so you'll want to look at those laws in your state when you look at testing and evaluation and even some of the other parameters around homeschooling as well. So that is very important to do. And but testing and evaluation is available to all homeschoolers in all states. And Deborah does minister to Colorado, and so some of the questions that I have will be um, toward some of the Colorado families. And so, Deborah, since you serve Colorado
Mhm.
homeschool families, what are the testing and valuation requirements for Colorado?
Right. And so, Yvonne, as you know, and as many of our listeners may know, in Colorado, we have three options that we can really homeschool under. So the first one is through a letter of intent, and if a family does it that way, then by our home-based education law, when a student has, and I'll read it to get it correctly, has reached grade 3, 5, 7, 9, and 11, then they should be given either a nationally standardized achievement test to evaluate their progress, or a qualified person shall evaluate the child's academic progress. So that's the first option. And again, it goes along with families that are homeschooling under a letter of intent. Another option is if a family is homeschooling under an umbrella school or an independent school, then they need to be following what that school is notifying that they need to be following. And the third option here in Colorado is that they can homeschool under a parent's active teaching license. And then that license gives that parent the opportunity to decide what that evaluation or testing should look like at that time.
Great, thank you for sharing that. And in Colorado, since we're talking about the testing and the evaluation, who can administer those standardized tests and who can do evaluations?
Right. So again, by home-based education law here in Colorado, we can do standardized testing, and typically the standardized testing, who can do it is actually determined more by the test administrator, meaning whoever is providing the test. So if it is, for instance, Iowa assessments, if it's California Achievement Test, and there's a long list of tests that you can use for nationalized standardized testing, each of those test providers note who can do a test and administer it that way. So it would be dependent upon the test that you as a family choose. And then for evaluation, again, by home-based education law, there are qualifications for a person to be, as they call it, a qualified individual. And those are either a teacher that's licensed in Colorado, or a teacher who is employed by an independent or parochial school, or a licensed psychologist, or the last one is a person with a graduate degree in education.
Great. This is good information for those homeschool families here in Colorado.
Yes.
And I understand that you offer both nationally standardized testing and also evaluations to the Colorado homeschool families. Can you explain the processes for each?
Yes. So for testing, specifically connecting with me as a tester or another person, you would contact them and discuss, first of all, a calendar date as to when you want to test. Families do test year round based upon when they're homeschooling and what it looks like for their family, and also based upon when their child has finished that third grade, fifth grade, seventh grade, ninth grade, or 11th grade. So they would choose then the test and the level for that child, choose what kind of test they wanted to use. Some of the tests are timed, some are not as much a timed focused. So looking into that. Then the test would be rented from the provider. The next step would be to plan out testing times. And typically for ones like Iowa assessments, you want to plan more than one testing session, just because after several tests, everybody's brain goes on fry. And so it's helpful to have more than one test time calendar scheduled. And then the next thing is that the proctor, or in this case myself, would receive the test, help administer the test, and then return the test. And then lastly, the results are returned to the parent. For evaluation, it goes very similar, scheduling with myself, providing samples of work, discussing those samples, and then usually that's done with the parent and the student meeting together, and then discussing their skills, discussing the highs and the lows of the last year, and then also providing to that family documentation that the evaluation was finished.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing that. You know, we are going to come back after a short break. So I thank you so much for sharing this valuable information with our listeners about testing. And we'll be back to talk more about testing and then also evaluation services. You can tune in at KPPF Power Talk Radio at 1040 a.m. 98.5 FM and 95.7 FM, or like and subscribe to Power Talk 1040 AM on YouTube. Hi, welcome back to the Huntington Way Show. You can tune in at KPPF Power Talk Radio at 1040 AM, 98.5 FM, and 95.7 FM. I am here with Deborah Randall, and we're talking about testing and evaluation. Deborah, can you explain the reasons that homeschool families might want to consider a nationally standardized test or an evaluation?
Of course, we are talking about for today mostly what I know in Colorado. So I wanted to just preface that first. But there are several reasons that families may choose, first of all, standardized testing. They might do that because it's familiar to them. They might do it because they are planning to have their child go back to a public or private school and it's good practice. It might be something that they have just a personal and family preference that they want to have a standardized testing
Right.
score. Another one might be that they are considering what that child's future might look like. So, specifically, if they're going to be in college or in some type of a trade school, they're going to be taking potentially a lot of tests. It'd be super important for them to have those skills. Now, the other reason might be, maybe I should do an evaluation instead. And so I know in the earlier section you mentioned how with your children you have one that just needed a little bit longer time to go into learning. And so that would be a great reason to choose an evaluation. Maybe they are struggling in reading and it would be super stressful for them maybe at fifth grade because some of them are time tests to try and do a standardized test but do an evaluation instead. Another reason might be the opposite end. Your child is well advanced and just taking a regular standardized test, they're going to blow it out of the water and really maybe not see what they are also capable of beyond that. And then again, it might be a personal preference for the family.
Yes, these are some very good points and really keying into their future and some of the things that they are struggling with really does help. And as parents, it's so nice that we know our children so well, so and that we have those options to choose from.
Definitely.
Yeah, definitely. So, when should homeschool families take these tests and where are those results submitted?
Yes, great questions. So one of the things is really it depends on your family as to when the test should be taken. So typically you're doing it at the end of the learning year for, again, in Colorado, third, fifth, seventh, ninth, and 11th grades. So that end of the year, though, could really be December. You might have started really early in your school year. You might be schooling year round. So there isn't a specific end by date. Now, I do say that though with a little asterisk to let families know that if you are part of an umbrella school or an independent school, you might have a deadline that you need to meet. So be aware of those things for that. But really, it can be year round. But you do again want to have it at the end of the year. So this last year I did a standardized test in January for a family. Last year I did one in June. So it really depends on the family's choices. And then those results are again depending on in Colorado how you were homeschooling, where you're going to put those results or send them in. So if it's a letter of intent, it would be wherever you have placed your letter of intent, a school district here in Colorado, or if you have someone such as the Christian Home Educators of Colorado, or CHEC, as we know it here in Colorado. If it is with them, then that would be your repository and you would put your results with that school.
Well, that's great. So, I just wanted to think, maybe just remind our listeners that in Colorado, if you, or maybe even in other states, if you are working under an umbrella school or also maybe known as an independent school, that you will want to check for their policies and just abide by their policies because some of their testing and evaluation might need to be submitted in different years than what the state is recommending or requiring as well. So, Well, how should a family prepare for testing or for evaluations?
So for both of those is talk to the evaluator or the test administrator that you're going to use. And if you're doing one online, you can talk to that test provider. They have wonderful customer service. For instance, BJU Press Homeschooling is one of the companies that I work with, and they are well able to answer a lot of questions. Another thing really is to pray as a family, like, is this the decision we should do, whether testing or evaluations? And go with what you feel like God is speaking in your heart to do. Talk about it as a family. If you have another parent, a dad or a mom, talk to those individuals about it. What do we think is our child is needing? And that's really a focus. What is it for our child? And then the next thing is just really some of the practical things. Get good sleep, have some good food, don't plan any a lot of extra activities on that day for testing. As I mentioned in the first episode, you probably may need to have two testing sessions, meaning two different days of testings. So just have some of those practical things in mind. And then also just talk to your child that this isn't a like their life will be ruined if they don't do well in this test. Like there are opportunities again to take another test if need be, or doing evaluation instead, or do an evaluation and rejoice and celebrate what you have been able to do that year with your students.
Oh, I love that. And you have such practical advice for those parents that might have been nervous about taking those tests or having those kids take those tests. And so I really thank you for that. Just calming those parents' nerves and just letting them know that, hey, you know, don't be nervous. This is just a gauge or a tool for them to, or for you guys, to really um, be able to see where they are at and that we don't need to be nervous about it. It's really just a tool. So, do you have any other advice for nervous parents or kids?
I think also to look at it as you mentioned, like the tool opportunity, that you're going to learn from it and that your children will learn from it too. Specifically, evaluations, I do them in person. And so the evaluation that often by the end of it, they're like, oh, this is so much fun. I didn't know we had done all these things. And there's an excitement. And to me, I often share with parents that specifically the evaluation seems like the children get a time to show off. It's like a big show and tell, like, what did you do this past year? And let's talk about it and let's dream for the year ahead.
Oh, I love that. That's just such sweet advice for our families. Oh, if a parent does not understand those testing scores, or what they mean, where can they get help in interpreting those?
So I will say some of the terminology like norms, standardization of things, um, you may not have that vocabulary in your daily vocabulary. So feel free to look online. What do they mean for standardized testing? What are the terminologies? Another one is again going back to the test provider. They are a great resource as to what do those terms mean and what do the results mean. And then also in Colorado, we have for nationally standardized tests, they have to be at a 13% or above as a passing. So for most students, it is an ease to get to that level. And then thirdly would be to talk if I'm administrating it or another person is doing it, talk to them. Like, what does this mean? How can we talk through this? What levels are we struggling in? Is it often math and or is it English? Like, what are tools then we can use as a family for the next learning year for our student?
Oh, yes. And that really brings me to the Huntington Learning Center too, because they help with ACT or SAT prep, or sometimes if someone is struggling, they can help with that as well. And so you can contact the Huntington Learning Center as a listener, just telling you that you can contact the Huntington Learning Center and have them help you with some of those things to help your children just, gain a little bit more in that direction. So, um, well, what type of documentation is provided at the conclusion of the testing or the evaluations?
So for testing, a documentation would come from the test provider themselves, and each test has its own format that they provide the information and the scores and what those scores look like. And they usually also come with a wonderful page that explains what those scores actually mean. And so you can see where your student is standing against typically other students in that average grade range. Then for an evaluation, you can talk again to me as the evaluator or another person. What do these scores mean? What does this documentation look like?
Yeah, and I'm so grateful for you and other evaluators that you have that knowledge that you can help out with. Um, so, how might a family prepare for an evaluation, and what advice do you have for them? Yeah.
Yes, so for an evaluation, things that they might want to prepare is typically what we are doing, again, here in Colorado, we have this opportunity, is sitting down with the family and looking at samples of work from the beginning, middle, and in the end. And I will say that's the evaluation process that I utilize. There are other evaluators here in Colorado that ask parents to upload samples of work and they look at them and document it that way and then return that information to the parents that way. But for mine, we sit down together. We'll look at beginnings, middle, and end of the year and all the subject areas. I also love to look at what a child's passions are. So I've had karate things, I've had shown to me, I've had cookies baked for me, I've had piano recitals given to me.
Aw.
So it's just very interesting to, again, see the passions of the different children. And then I also love to see things that are not typically maybe in the mainstream school
Oh.
um, agendas. So.
Yeah, that is just so sweet. I bet families just love meeting with
Mhm.
you. So, how might families in Colorado reach you?
Yes. So for families in Colorado, one of the main ways would be through my website, and another way is through my email address. And I don't have the memory, so I'm going to read them. So for my email address is learninginthesprings@gmail.com. You can either call or text on 719-229-6933, or my website is learningsprings.wixsite.com forward dash learning springs.
Aw, thank you so much for joining me on the show, Deborah. You had such sweet and valuable information for our listeners. And, thank you, listeners, for joining us in talking about testing and evaluations. This is Yvonne Strawn, today's host on the Huntington Way Show. We support you in educating your kids. Join us at KPPF Power Talk Radio at 1040 a.m., 98.5 FM, and 95.7 FM, or like and subscribe on YouTube.